"I can wash your feet," the desperate bride pleaded through dust-stained tears, her wedding dress torn and muddy as she approached the weathered rancher standing motionless in the town square. The townsfolk whispered cruel predictions. She would starve, disappear, or worse. A woman abandoned at the altar had no future in this unforgiving frontier settlement. But the quiet rancher possessed a dangerous secret that could either destroy them both or forge an alliance that would shake the very foundations of their rigid community. Hidden forces had orchestrated her downfall for reasons far more sinister than anyone suspected, and the choice he made in this moment would either condemn her to the fate everyone expected or ignite a chain of events that would expose a conspiracy reaching far beyond their small town. Would he turn away like every decent man should, or would his response change both their destinies forever? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The morning sun blazed mercilessly over Copper Creek as Henrietta James smoothed her borrowed wedding dress one final time. The white fabric, yellowed with age and patched at the seams, hung loose on her slender frame. She stood beneath the makeshift altar outside the general store, waiting. Dust swirled around her ankles. The townspeople gathered in a loose semicircle, their faces mixing curiosity with disdain. Eloise Hart, the town's self-appointed matriarch, fanned herself vigorously while whispering to the women beside her. Sheriff Amos Tull leaned against a wooden post, his badge catching the light. His weathered face showed no emotion as he watched the spectacle unfold. A young man with calloused hands swept hay near the stable. Tommy Marsh kept his head down, but his eyes tracked every movement in the square. He had seen arrangements like this before. They never ended well. The sound of approaching horses broke the morning stillness. Silas Grimm rode into the square atop a black stallion, his silver spurs gleaming. 3 men flanked him, their hands resting casually on their gun belts. Silas dismounted with practiced ease, his expensive boots hitting the dirt with authority. Henrietta's breath caught in her throat. This was the man who had purchased her contract from the plantation owner back east, the man who promised her freedom through marriage. Silas approached with measured steps. His cold eyes assessed her like livestock at auction. He pulled a folded document from his vest pocket and held it toward her. "Sign this." Henrietta accepted the papers with trembling fingers. The legal language was complex, but she understood every word. Her heart sank as she read the conditions. This was not a marriage contract. This was ownership transfer. "Well?" Silas demanded. Henrietta looked up from the document. "This says I would have no legal rights as your wife, that all property and earnings would belong solely to you." The square fell silent. Eloise's heart stopped fanning. Sheriff Tull straightened from his post. Tommy's broom stilled in his hands. Silas's face darkened. "You can read?" "Yes, sir. I can also write in cipher numbers." "Who taught you?" "The plantation owner's daughter. Before she married and moved away." Silas snatched the document back. His jaw clenched as he studied her face with new understanding. An educated woman would ask questions. She would know her rights. She would be impossible to control. "The deal is off." He turned toward his horse. "Wait." Henrietta stepped forward. "Please, sir. I can still be a good wife. I can cook and clean and tend to your home." Silas swung back around. "A woman who thinks she's smart is nothing but trouble. Find yourself another fool." He mounted his stallion and spurred it hard. His men followed without a word, leaving a cloud of dust and shattered dreams behind. The townspeople began to disperse, shaking their heads and muttering among themselves. Eloise Hart approached with false sympathy dripping from her voice. "Poor dear, but perhaps it's for the best. A woman in your position needs to know her place." Henrietta stood alone in the square as the last of the crowd melted away. Her future had evaporated in minutes. She had no money, no family, and no prospects. In this frontier town, a woman without protection faced grim choices. She approached the general store owner first. "Sir, I can work. I'm strong and willing." The man barely looked up from his ledger. "Don't need help?" She tried the blacksmith next, then the hotel owner, Then the dress shop. Each door closed before she finished speaking. Word traveled fast in small towns. Silas Grimm's rejection marked her as trouble. Tommy watched from the stable as she made her desperate rounds. His chest tightened with each rejection. He wanted to help but had nothing to offer. A stable hand's wages barely fed one person, let alone two. As evening approached, Henrietta found herself back in the town square. Her feet ached and her throat burned from dust and disappointment. Only one option remained. Jedediah Walker emerged from the saloon, moving with the measured gait of a man carrying invisible weight. His brown hair showed gray at the temples. Deep lines creased his sun-weathered face. He had the look of someone who had lost everything that mattered. Jed owned a small ranch outside town. His wife Sarah had died 2 years earlier, leaving him to manage alone. Neighbors whispered that he was failing. His cattle were thin and his fences needed mending. Henrietta's heart hammered as she approached him. This was her last chance. If he refused her, she would face the coming night with nowhere to go and no hope for tomorrow. The consequences of that prospect terrified her more than anything Silas Grimm could have done. At least a bad marriage offered shelter and food. Destitution offered nothing but slow death, or worse alternatives she refused to consider. Jed looked up as she neared. His gray eyes held neither cruelty nor kindness, just the tired acceptance of a man who expected nothing good from life. Henrietta dropped to her knees in the dust before him. Her voice cracked with desperation as she spoke the words that would either save her or seal her fate. "I can wash your feet. Please, sir. I can work hard. I'll do anything you need." Jed stared down at Henrietta kneeling in the dust. Her desperate plea hung in the air between them. The few remaining townspeople watched from doorways and windows, waiting to see how quickly he would dismiss her. He studied her face. Tears had carved clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks, but her eyes held intelligence. Something about her reminded him of Sarah during her final days, when she begged the doctor to save their unborn child. "Stand up," Jed said quietly. Henrietta rose on unsteady legs. Her hands shook as she brushed dust from her ruined wedding dress. "You said you can read?" "Yes, sir." Jed glanced around the square. Eloise's heart lingered near the general store, straining to hear every word. Sheriff Tull watched from his office doorway. This conversation needed privacy. "Walk with me." They headed toward the edge of town in silence. Henrietta's bare feet made no sound on the packed earth. Her shoes had worn through days earlier, but she had endured worse hardships. At his wagon, Jed reached under the driver's seat and pulled out a leather satchel. He opened it and withdrew a stack of papers. His jaw tightened as he held them toward her. "What do these say?" Henrietta accepted the documents carefully. The first was a notice from the bank about overdue payments. The second demanded immediate settlement of a feed bill. The third threatened legal action over unpaid taxes. "These are collection notices, sir. You owe money to several creditors." Jed's shoulders sagged. "How much?" Henrietta studied the figures. "Nearly $400 total." "That's what I figured." He took the papers back and stared at them. "My wife Sarah handled all the reading and writing. She kept the books, wrote the letters, managed everything that required education. The admission cost him." Frontiermen prided themselves on self-reliance. Confessing illiteracy to a stranger violated everything he had been taught about strength. Sarah died giving birth 2 years ago. Lost the baby, too. His voice carried old pain. "I've been struggling to keep the ranch running ever since. Can't read contracts properly. Don't know how to write letters to buyers. The whole operation is falling apart." Henrietta waited. She sensed this moment balanced on a knife's edge. "I need help with the business side of ranching. Someone who can handle correspondence, keep proper books, negotiate with buyers." He met her eyes directly. "Would you be interested in that kind of work?" The question stunned her. She had expected him to offer kitchen duties or laundry work. Every other potential employer had seen her as suitable only for the most menial tasks. "What exactly are you proposing, sir?" A partnership. You handle the paperwork and business dealings. I handle the cattle and physical work. We split the profits equally. Henrietta's breath caught. Equal partnership with a white rancher was unheard of in Texas. Such an arrangement would violate every social custom and legal precedent. Sir, I'm not sure such an arrangement would be acceptable to your neighbors. My neighbors aren't facing bankruptcy. Jed folded the collection notices carefully. I need someone smart enough to save this ranch. You need a way to survive. Seems like we can help each other. Across the square, Eloise Hart gathered her skirts and marched toward them. Her face radiated disapproval and determination. This is highly irregular, Jedediah Walker, she announced before reaching them. What will people think? They'll think I'm trying to save my ranch, Eloise. By bringing that woman into your home? Unmarried and unchaperoned? She fanned herself vigorously. The very idea is scandalous. She won't be living in my house. The old foreman's cabin is empty. She can stay there. Eloise's eyes narrowed. Mark my words. No good will come of this. A woman of her station has no business handling a man's affairs. Her station? Jed's voice carried warning. You know what I mean? Eloise lifted her chin. Some people need to remember their proper place in society. Sheriff Tull approached from across the square. His hand rested casually on his gun belt as he joined the conversation. Evening, Jed. Miss Hart. He nodded politely before focusing on Henrietta. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. This is Henrietta, Jed said. She's going to help me manage my ranch business. Tull's eyebrows rose. Is that so? What kind of help exactly? Bookkeeping, correspondence, record management. Interesting. The sheriff's tone suggested anything but approval. You sure that's wise? Woman in her position might not be the most reliable employee. Henrietta felt the familiar sting of prejudice. These people looked at her and saw only limitations. They assumed she was desperate, untrustworthy, and incapable of meaningful work. Tommy appeared at the edge of the group. He had been sweeping the same patch of ground for 10 minutes, listening to every word. Begging your pardon, he said quietly. But seems to me a person's worth ought to be judged by their actions, not their circumstances. Eloise whirled on him. Nobody asked your opinion, boy. Tommy ducked his head but didn't retreat. His quiet courage impressed Henrietta. Jed made his decision. Henrietta, if you're willing, I'd like you to start tomorrow morning. The cabin needs cleaning, but it's weatherproof. Yes, sir. I'm very willing. Then it's settled. He climbed onto his wagon seat. I'll pick you up at dawn. As Jed drove away, Henrietta stood alone facing the disapproving stares of Eloise Hart and Sheriff Tull. She had found unexpected opportunity in her darkest hour, but she could see the storm clouds gathering in their eyes. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Walker Ranch. Henrietta stood in the doorway of the small foreman's cabin, surveying her new home. The single room contained a bed frame with a thin mattress, a wooden table, and a pot-bellied stove. Dust coated everything like a shroud. She had spent the night cleaning and organizing. Her few possessions fit easily in the table's single drawer. The work gave her hands purpose while her mind raced with possibilities. Jed appeared at the cabin door as the sun cleared the horizon. His weathered face showed no emotion, but she caught him glancing around the spotless room with approval. Ready to see the books? The main house bore the neglect of a grieving widower. Dishes sat unwashed in the kitchen sink. Clothes lay scattered across furniture. But the small office where Sarah had once worked remained untouched, like a shrine to better days. Henrietta surveyed the chaos of papers covering the desk. Bills mixed with correspondence. Receipts buried important documents. The ledger book lay open to entries from 6 months ago. Where do you keep your cattle records? Jed pointed to a wooden crate overflowing with scraps of paper. Sarah used to organize all that. I just threw everything in there after she died. Henrietta rolled up her sleeves. The magnitude of the task became clear as she sorted through the accumulated mess. Jed owed money to the bank, the feed store, the veterinarian, and 3 different suppliers. His cattle records were incomplete. His correspondence had gone unanswered for months. But underneath the chaos, she discovered something remarkable. The ranch had strong bones, good grazing land, healthy breeding stock, solid relationships with reliable buyers. Sarah had built an excellent foundation before her death. Your wife was a remarkable businesswoman. Jed's jaw tightened. She was remarkable at everything. By midday, Henrietta had created order from chaos. She separated bills by priority, organized correspondence by date, and began reconstructing the cattle records from scattered notes and receipts. Her first major discovery came while reviewing breeding records. Sarah had been tracking bloodlines meticulously. The ranch's bulls carried premium genetics that commanded top prices, but Jed had been selling his cattle to local buyers at standard rates. "You're underselling your stock by at least 30%. Jed looked up from mending a bridle. "What do you mean?" Henrietta spread the breeding charts across the kitchen table. "Your cattle have superior bloodlines. Buyers in Dallas and San Antonio pay premium prices for this quality. You've been selling to local dealers who treat them like common stock. Sarah handled all the buyer relationships. After she died, I just sold to whoever showed up. That stops now." Henrietta pulled out a sheet of paper and began drafting a letter. "I'm writing to the premium buyers in the big cities. We'll establish direct relationships and eliminate the middlemen." Within a week, responses arrived from cattle buyers across Texas. The letters contained offers that made Jed's eyes widen. Premium buyers were eager to establish relationships with the Walker Ranch. Henrietta negotiated carefully. She played buyers against each other, driving prices higher. Her mathematical skills allowed her to calculate transportation costs and profit margins with precision. Soon, the ranch had contracts for the entire year's production at prices 50% higher than Jed had been receiving. But success brought scrutiny. Other ranchers began asking questions. How had Jed suddenly become such a shrewd businessman? Where were these new contracts coming from? Eloise Hart made regular visits to the general store, spreading whispers about the inappropriate arrangement at the Walker Ranch. Sheriff Tull found excuses to ride past the property, watching for signs of impropriety. One afternoon, 3 neighboring ranchers confronted Jed at the feed store. Their leader, a thick-set man named William Graves, spoke for the group. "Heard you're getting premium prices for your cattle this year." "That's right. Mind sharing how you manage that?" "We've been ranching twice as long and never seen offers like yours." Jed hesitated. Admitting Henrietta's role would expose them both to criticism and worse, but lying felt wrong. "I've improved my business practices." Graves snorted. "Overnight? Must have been quite an inspiration." The men left with suspicion written on their faces. Jed knew their questions would multiply. That evening he found Henrietta working by lamplight in the cabin. She had taught him to read simple contracts, and he was slowly improving. But her intelligence still amazed him. She absorbed complex information instantly and saw solutions he never would have imagined. "The neighbors are asking questions about our success." Henrietta set down her pen. "What kind of questions?" "They want to know how I suddenly became so good at business." "And what did you tell them?" "Nothing specific, but they're suspicious." Henrietta nodded thoughtfully. Success often breeds resentment, especially when it challenges people's expectations. A week later, their worst fears materialized. Silas Grimm returned to Copper Creek with a leather portfolio full of legal documents. He rode straight to Sheriff Tull's office and emerged an hour later with a satisfied expression. Word spread quickly through town. Silas claimed legal ownership of Henrietta based on the marriage contract. He demanded her immediate return to fulfill her obligations. Tommy overheard the conversation at the general store and raced to the ranch with the news. He found Jed and Henrietta reviewing cattle inventories in the cabin. "Mr. Silas is back," he gasped, breathless from his hard ride. "He's got papers. Says she belongs to him." Henrietta's hand stilled on the ledger pages. The color drained from her face. "What kind of papers?" Jed demanded. "Legal documents. Sheriff Tull seemed to think they were legitimate." Jed stood slowly. His gray eyes had turned cold as winter steel. "We'll see about that." Sheriff Tull arrived at the Walker Ranch the next morning with Silas Grimm riding beside him. Both men sat their horses with the confidence of authority. Silas carried a leather portfolio thick with official-looking documents. Jed emerged from the barn where he had been feeding cattle. Henrietta appeared in the cabin doorway, her face composed despite the fear in her eyes. Tommy lingered near the water trough, pretending to work while watching everything unfold. "Morning, Jed," Tull said, touching the brim of his hat. "Got some legal business to discuss with you." Silas dismounted and opened his portfolio. "This woman belongs to me. I have the marriage contract right here, properly witnessed and signed." "Let me see those papers," Jed said. Silas handed over the documents with a satisfied smile. The contract bore official seals and multiple signatures. To anyone who couldn't read well, it looked completely legitimate. But Henrietta had taught Jed to examine legal documents carefully. He studied the pages with new eyes, looking for the details Sarah had always warned him about. "These papers are dated 3 weeks ago." "So?" "Henrietta has been living and working on my ranch for 2 months." "How can you have a marriage contract that predates her arrival here?" Silas's smile faltered slightly. "The date doesn't matter. She agreed to marry me. But she never signed anything. She didn't need to. I purchased her contract from her previous owner." Henrietta stepped forward. "I'd like to examine those documents." Tull shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Don't see why that's necessary." "Because I can read," Henrietta said firmly, "and I want to understand exactly what these papers claim." Silas reluctantly handed her the contract. She studied each page with the thoroughness Jed had come to respect. Her expression grew increasingly puzzled. "This is very strange. The witness signatures don't match the handwriting styles in the main document. The ink color varies between sections, and several of the legal terms are used incorrectly." "What are you suggesting?" Tull demanded. "I'm suggesting this contract was assembled from multiple sources and backdated to appear legitimate." Silas snatched the papers back. "I don't have to stand here and listen to accusations from a woman who doesn't know her place." "Maybe not," Jed said quietly, "but I'd like to hear what else she noticed." Henrietta's mind raced as she recalled the document details. "The most telling evidence is the paper itself. 3 different types were used. You can see the texture and color variations if you look closely." Tommy had been inching closer during the conversation. His sharp eyes caught something the adults had missed. "Mr. Jed, that ain't the only strange thing. I seen Mr. Silas talking with some men behind the saloon yesterday. They had a whole pile of similar documents spread out on a table." All eyes turned to the young man. His face flushed red, but he continued speaking. "Looked like they were putting together contracts from different pieces. Had bottles of ink and lots of different pens." Silas's face darkened. "Boy, you better watch your tongue." "Or what?" Jed stepped protectively closer to Tommy. The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. Tull's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped when he saw Jed's steady gaze. "I think we should take a closer look at those documents," Jed said. "Maybe get a judge to examine them properly." "That won't be necessary," Silas said quickly. "I have other business to attend to. But this matter isn't finished." He remounted his horse and spurred it hard. Dust swirled as he galloped toward town. Sheriff Tull lingered a moment longer. "Jed, you're walking into dangerous territory. Some fights aren't worth having. And some fights choose you whether you want them or not." After Tull rode away, the 3 of them stood in heavy silence. Henrietta's hands trembled as the full implications sank in. "If those documents are forged, it means this is bigger than just my situation." "What do you mean?" Jed asked. "Think about it. Why would someone go to such elaborate trouble to create fake marriage contracts? This level of deception requires planning, resources, and multiple accomplices." Tommy nodded eagerly. "And if they're doing it to her, they're probably doing it to other women too." The thought chilled them all. Henrietta had assumed her predicament was unique. But Tommy's observation about multiple documents suggested a systematic operation. "We need to find out how many other women are involved," Henrietta said. "How do we do that?" Jed asked. By investigating carefully. If this is an organized scheme, there will be evidence, records, communications, money changing hands. That evening, Tommy volunteered to gather information in town. His work at the stable gave him access to conversations and documents that others might not notice. People tended to ignore young workers, making him an ideal spy. He returned the next day with disturbing news. 3 other women had been brought to nearby towns under similar circumstances in the past year. All were educated. All had been abandoned or sold by men claiming to be their husbands. All had disappeared without explanation.
Disappeared how? Henrietta demanded. Nobody knows. They were just gone one day. People assumed they moved on or found other arrangements. The pattern was becoming clear. Someone was systematically targeting educated women, using fake contracts to control them, and then making them vanish when they became inconvenient. We're dealing with criminals, Jed said grimly. Henrietta felt a new determination rising within her. This wasn't just about her freedom anymore. Other women's lives hung in the balance. Then we need to stop them. Henrietta spent the following week crafting a careful plan. She wrote letters to neighboring towns under assumed names, inquiring about missing women who matched the descriptions Tommy had provided. The responses painted a disturbing picture of systematic disappearances across 3 counties. Each case followed the same pattern. Educated women arrived with questionable marriage contracts. Local officials accepted the documents without thorough examination. The women vanished within months, leaving no trace. Jed used his growing network of cattle buyers to gather information. Ranchers and merchants talked freely around him, unaware that he now understood the full implications of their casual conversations. Several mentioned strange legal arrangements and women who had worked briefly before disappearing. Tommy proved invaluable as their eyes and ears in town. His youth and humble position made him nearly invisible to adults conducting sensitive business. He observed meetings, overheard conversations, and noted patterns that might otherwise go unnoticed. During one of his reconnaissance missions, Tommy made a crucial discovery. He found Silas meeting with Sheriff Tull and 2 other men behind the hotel. Their conversation carried clearly in the still evening air. "The federal marshals are asking too many questions," Tull said nervously. "Maybe we should slow down operations for a while." "Absolutely not," Silas replied firmly. "We have buyers waiting in New Orleans. 3 more women are scheduled for delivery next month." Tommy's blood ran cold as the full scope of their operation became clear. These weren't just fake marriages. They were selling people. "What about the Walker situation?" one of the other men asked. "I'll handle that personally," Silas said. "The woman knows too much, and Walker is becoming a problem. They both need to disappear." Tommy raced back to the ranch with this intelligence. He found Henrietta and Jed reviewing documents in the cabin by lamplight. "They're planning something terrible," he gasped. "Mr. Silas and the sheriff are working together. They're selling women to buyers in New Orleans." Henrietta set down her pen slowly. The pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. This wasn't just about controlling women's labor. It was human trafficking disguised as legal marriage arrangements. "How many women are involved?" Jed asked. "They mentioned 3 more scheduled for next month, but I think there have been many others." Henrietta stood and walked to the window. The implications overwhelmed her. Dozens of women might have suffered this fate while communities looked the other way. "We have to stop them." "How?" Jed asked. "Sheriff Tull is part of it." "The local law can't be trusted." "Then we go higher. Federal marshals have jurisdiction over interstate crimes. Selling people across state lines is a federal offense." Tommy nodded eagerly. "I heard Mr. Silas mention federal marshals are already asking questions. Maybe someone else has reported suspicious activity." Henrietta began formulating their strategy. They needed irrefutable evidence presented to the right authorities. But gathering that evidence would be dangerous, especially if Silas suspected their investigation. "We need to be very careful. If they realize what we're doing, we could all disappear like the others." Over the next few days, they worked systematically to build their case. Henrietta drafted detailed reports documenting each missing woman, including dates, locations, and circumstances. Jed used his business connections to gather witness statements from people who had seen suspicious activities.
Tommy continued his surveillance, mapping the network of accomplices and documenting their meetings. Their breakthrough came when Tommy discovered a cache of documents in Silas's hotel room. While cleaning the hallway, he noticed the room was empty and the door slightly ajar. Inside, he found a strong box containing contracts, correspondence, and financial records. The documents revealed the full scope of the operation. Silas worked with corrupt officials in multiple towns to create fake marriage contracts. The women were then sold to buyers who transported them to other states where they disappeared into forced labor or worse situations. Tommy carefully copied the most incriminating documents, replacing the originals exactly as he found them. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, but their investigation had not gone unnoticed. Eloise Hart approached Jed at the general store with a warning disguised as gossip. "People are saying you and that woman are causing trouble, asking too many questions about things that don't concern you." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that gets people hurt." Her voice carried genuine concern beneath the judgmental exterior. "Some folks think you should mind your own business before something unfortunate happens." Jed understood the implied threat. Their activities had attracted dangerous attention. That evening, he found Henrietta preparing a comprehensive report for the federal marshals. Her handwriting was precise and her arguments methodical. She had compiled evidence that would destroy Silas's operation and expose the corruption throughout the region. "This is enough to convict them all," she said, reviewing her work. "But we need to get it to the right people without being stopped." "How do we do that?" "We make it public. If we present the evidence openly in front of the entire community, they won't be able to silence us or make us disappear." Jed nodded slowly. It was a dangerous gamble, but their only realistic option. "When?" "Tomorrow, at the town meeting. Everyone will be there, including witnesses who can verify what we present." Tommy entered the cabin carrying his latest intelligence. "Mr. Silas is meeting with his men tonight. I heard them talking about ending the Walker problem permanently." Henrietta looked at Jed with grim determination. "Then tomorrow it is." The town meeting convened at high noon in the largest building available, the church sanctuary. Henrietta stood outside, clutching her carefully prepared documents. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind remained clear and focused. Jed squeezed her shoulder gently. "You ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Tommy positioned himself near the back door, ready to fetch help if needed. Federal marshals were reportedly in the next county investigating similar crimes. If their plan worked, reinforcements would arrive within hours. The sanctuary filled quickly. Ranchers, merchants, wives, and workers packed the wooden pews. Eloise Hart occupied her usual front row seat, fanning herself nervously. Sheriff Tull stood against the side wall, his hand resting on his gun belt. Silas Grimm entered with 3 associates, their faces hard and watchful. They took seats near the center aisle, positioning themselves to control the room's exits. Mayor Harrison called the meeting to order. The agenda covered mundane town business, road repairs, school funding, livestock regulations. Henrietta waited patiently through each tedious discussion. Finally, Mayor Harrison asked if anyone had additional business to address. Henrietta stood. Every head in the room turned toward her. Conversations died to whispers, then to complete silence. "I have evidence of criminal activity that affects this entire community." Silas half rose from his seat. "This woman has no right to speak at a public meeting." "Actually, she does," Mayor Harrison said reluctantly. "Town meetings are open to all residents." Henrietta walked to the front of the sanctuary. Her legs felt unsteady, but her voice remained strong and clear. "My name is Henrietta James. 3 months ago, I was brought to this town under a fraudulent marriage contract. What I discovered since then will shock you all." She held up the documents Tommy had copied from Silas's room. "These papers prove that a criminal organization has been operating in our region for over 2 years. They create fake marriage contracts to control educated women, then sell those women to buyers in other states." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several women covered their mouths in horror. Sheriff Tull stepped forward. "Those are stolen documents. This woman is a thief and a liar." "Then let's examine the evidence," Henrietta replied calmly. She opened the first document and began reading aloud. This letter from Silas Grimm to a buyer in New Orleans discusses the sale of 3 women for $800 each. Silas lunged toward her, but Jed blocked his path. The 2 men faced each other in tense confrontation. "She's lying," Silas snarled. "Those documents are forgeries." Henrietta continued reading. Each piece of evidence painted a more damning picture: financial records showing payments for human cargo, correspondence discussing the best methods for controlling educated women, lists of names and locations spanning multiple states. The crowd's mood shifted from skepticism to outrage. Women wept as they realized the scope of the crimes. Men muttered angrily about corruption in their midst. "Furthermore," Henrietta said, "I have testimony from witnesses in 3 neighboring towns about women who disappeared under identical circumstances." She called Tommy forward. The young man's voice shook, but he clearly described everything he had seen and heard. His detailed observations left no doubt about the conspiracy's reality. Eloise's heart rose slowly from her front row seat. Her face showed a mixture of shame and determination. "I owe this woman an apology. I judged her unfairly based on appearances and prejudice, but her courage and intelligence have exposed evil that we all should have recognized." The matriarch's public admission swayed the remaining doubters. If Eloise's heart acknowledged Henrietta's credibility, the evidence must be genuine. Sheriff Tull drew his weapon, but found himself facing a room full of angry citizens. Several ranchers had positioned themselves between him and the exits. His authority crumbled in the face of overwhelming opposition. "You're all making a terrible mistake," he said desperately. "This woman is a troublemaker who's filled your heads with lies." "The only lies we've heard came from you and Silas," Mayor Harrison declared. "I'm relieving you of your duties pending investigation by federal authorities." At that moment, Tommy burst through the back door with 3 federal marshals behind him. Their timing was perfect, as if orchestrated by divine providence. The lead marshal surveyed the scene quickly. "We've been tracking this criminal organization for months. If you have evidence, we're very interested in seeing it." Henrietta handed over her complete documentation. The marshal examined each piece with professional thoroughness. "This is exactly what we needed to complete our case. Ma'am, your investigation has probably saved dozens of lives." Silas and his associates were arrested immediately. Sheriff Tull joined them in shackles, his corruption finally exposed. The federal marshals promised swift justice and protection for all witnesses. In the days that followed, the scope of their crimes became fully apparent. The network had operated across 5 states, affecting over 40 women. Most had been recovered alive, though all bore scars from their ordeals. Henrietta's courage in speaking out had broken the conspiracy's power and freed its victims. 3 weeks later, Jed knelt in the same church sanctuary where Henrietta had exposed the truth. This time, his proposal came from love and respect, not desperation. "Will you marry me as an equal partner in all things?" Henrietta's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, but only if we formalize our business partnership too. I want legal protection for my contributions to the ranch." Their wedding took place the following month. Eloise Hart helped organize the ceremony, her attitude completely transformed. Tommy served as best man, his bravery having earned him acceptance as family. The Walker James Ranch prospered beyond all expectations. Henrietta's business skills, combined with Jed's ranching expertise, created a model operation that other partnerships sought to emulate. More importantly, their story inspired change throughout the region. Women gained new respect for their capabilities. Communities became more vigilant against exploitation. Laws were strengthened to prevent similar crimes. Henrietta often stood in the town square where her desperate plea had changed everything. But now, instead of begging for work, she was approached by others seeking her guidance and partnership. Her transformation from desperate bride to respected leader proved that courage and intelligence could overcome any obstacle.